Welcome to Shoot Like a Girl, a podcast featuring interviews with extraordinary military women from around the world who push their limits on and off duty. I'm your host, Kate Stewart, and this is episode number 4. Today's guest is Katherine Hanak. Katherine joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2008. Originally joining the Navy Reserves, she then transferred to become a combat engineer. After an injury almost ended her career, she fought her way back to become a combat diver, and then completed the gruelling selection process and course to become a search and rescue technician. If you happen to be on a boat in the North Atlantic and you run into trouble, it just might be Katherine who ends up saving you.
Steady, steady, nice and steady. Light, hill, cover. I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
So you better get out of my way now.
So you better get out of my way now.
Or I roll all over you.
Before I roll all over you.
All right, so welcome, Katherine. Thank you so much for being here today. I know we both had very busy schedules, so nailing down a time was a little bit difficult, but I'm so glad that you're here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, of course.
Awesome. So let's get started talking about growing up. Where did you grow up and what made you want to join the military?
Yeah, so I grew up, I'm originally French, so some of the stuff I might say, you might hear maybe a bit of an accent or whatnot. But so I grew up on this little town on the south shore of Montreal. My dad's English, my mom's French. So I was lucky enough to grow up with both, which became a huge asset, as you know, in life really. And so yeah, I grew up definitely just kind of like small town, nothing big. And no, I wasn't really surrounded by the military or anything, but you know, I'd seen the ads and you sent me this question and I was like kind of trying to go back to like why I joined, because I joined in 2008. So yeah, that would have been 12 years ago now.
Okay, me too, actually.
Yeah. Oh my God. Who knows? We could have been on same basic training or something. And I originally joined the Naval Reserves actually. So I was a bosun for like a really short stint. And then I transferred over to the Reg Force in 2010. Anyways, and, but I was thinking about why I joined, and really it kind of came down to just being so proud to be Canadian. Like I'm a huge patriot, like through and through. And I just thought if I could provide a service for my country and I could help in any way possible, I would be doing my duty. And that's kind of what attracted me, I guess, to joining.
Yeah, I find that growing up, I grew up in Halifax, so there's a huge Navy population there, but
Yeah.
since I didn't have any family in the military, I didn't really know anything about the military. And it wasn't until we really got involved in Afghanistan that it started becoming
More publicized.
a lot more publicized, more well-known. People started getting really a lot more patriotic around that time, like with the Highway of Heroes and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And even, you know, with 9/11, it was like, even though it wasn't us, it still hits close to home, you know, because it's our neighbors and people that, you know, we do know. And, you know, it's not like, you know, we can be pretty friendly with America. So
yeah, exactly. And the different Canadian cities, especially Newfoundland, taking people in during that time too. So
oh yeah, that was a huge thing for us. And yeah, there's a lot of history here. They've made a whole play about them landing in Newfoundland and everything.
Yeah, that's right. What's that one called again?
It's called
Come From Away, or is that no?
Come From Away. That's what it is.
Okay.
That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so there, that Newfoundland hospitality there.
That's right.
You were a Navy reservist.
That's right. Yeah.
Did you do basic training in Borden?
Yeah. So I went to Borden like pretty much like I graduated high school, and the next day everyone was just, you know, hungover perhaps, and I was just getting on a bus to go to Borden and do the 7-hour drive and start basic training. So I did it throughout the summer.
What platoon were you in?
Well, I was in a French platoon.
Oh, you were in the what was it, like Chateauguay?
Yeah, something like that. I think that's what it is. What it was called. Yeah, Chateauguay. Yeah.
Okay, so I would have been there at the exact same time as you.
No way! What are the chances?
Yeah, that's so funny. I joined in June 2008, and then kind of fast tracked everything. Like did all of the whatever I had to do, first aid and some distance learning, and
yeah,
I went for July. So that's way too funny.
That's funny.
That's such a small world.
Yeah, that is a small world. Wicked.
Okay, and then so you switched to Reg Force in 2010?
Yeah, so essentially, so I joined, I did basic, and then I went to like CJEP, which is like the Quebec equivalent of, college. And I did that for, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks. And I'd always been like I guess you can call it a bit more of a geek or a nerd in school. And after I did basic, I really loved, like, that was kind of my first time really being exposed to, being outside, working out, all that kind of stuff, and camping and whatnot. And I just really, really enjoyed it. And I thought, when I was in school, I wasn't paying attention anymore. It was just getting harder to stay motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And so my heart kind of led me, towards joining full time. And someone I had met like on my, what's that course it's like the NETP, is that what it's called?
Naval Environmental Training Program, where you do all the firefighting and the flood control.
Yeah. So I had met like a retired, or somewhat, like I think he was a combat engineer, and he became a combat diver, and then he became a ship's team diver. Anyways, so, and he was like, oh, he's like, you would really like the engineers. Like, I think you would fit in like pretty well. So then I put in my OT and I changed, and then I got to New Brunswick, did my training there as a combat engineer, and then got posted in 2010. Yeah, I got posted in 2010 to Edmonton, and then I did 8 years in Edmonton.
And did you do your combat diver course as well?
Yeah, I did. So essentially, that's kind of like that was a big part of my attitude towards like going SAR, was that, it was just such a big pipe dream.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, you know what? I was actually reading this in a book, Chris Hadfield's An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. Have you read it?
Yeah, I'm a big Chris Hadfield fan.
Yeah, me too. He's wicked. So, but you know how he says, like, being an astronaut, like, you just decide to be an astronaut. You just kind of like, you start doing these things that put you in a favorable position towards attaining these goals. It's like, if this course comes along and it could eventually help you, and it's towards that goal that you want to get, then you'll do the course. And so I just kind of like was like, oh, if I become a combat engineer, that's like a good basis. And just knowing a lot of combat arms eventually went search and rescue. I was like, okay, that gives me a good base. And then doing a combat dive course that would help, and then just kind of like made my way through, different courses and stuff that would help me eventually down the road.
Mm-hmm. And I think going through a course like that, a dive course where it's so physically demanding and you're under that constant pressure, definitely would help for a future of a course like SAR, where they do have a difficult selection process and the difficult course, and where you're under that physical and mental pressure, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. My journey was a very long one, to say the least, like long and challenging. And I'm glad we talked about briefly there. You brought up like the mental attitude you have towards things, and that's kind of what you want to focus on this podcast. And I think that was a huge part for me, because like from the time I kind of decided, okay, I'd like to be a SAR tech, it was a 10-year process. Mm-hmm. Some guys, they'll do it in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And it took me, kind of double that, because I went through different selections to become a combat diver. And then I went through same thing, different selections to be a SAR tech. And it was just that process, in a sense, like it built me up, but it did also, break me down to the fundamentals. You really got to dig deep and know if this is what you want. And the mental attitude was like, that was the bare bones in the end that kind of definitely led me to, pursuing the goals, I guess.
And I think also, I mean, as much of a pain as it is applying for something like that, you definitely know that by the time everyone gets to that SAR tech selection, they really want to be there. It's not just something that, who wants to do this and you're putting your hand up for it.
Oh yeah.
You worked so hard just to get to that beginning point almost.
Oh yeah,
so
for sure.
How many times did you have to put in your paperwork
for search and rescue? Yeah. So essentially, I kind of wrote down some dates. So in 2015, I did my first selection. So I didn't really, unfortunately, they don't make that recruiting process really easy. There's a lot of kind of things you have to prep, a lot of paperwork. And that's the thing, like you look at a lot of SAR techs, people who join the search and rescue trade, they're not really known for doing heavy administration.
Right. Yeah.
So they really challenge you in that sense. So I first put in my paperwork in 2015 when like Camp for Gen, came out, our paperwork. And then You go through the PT test, the aptitude test, you do personality tests, you do an interview, then they send your stuff to Ottawa. They decide, they get all these files up in Ottawa and they decide, okay, who are we sending on selection? And then I believe my first year I did selection was about 30 individuals.
Okay.
And I think about 7 finished. Maybe a bit more. So essentially our selection is 3 weeks long. So the first one I made it through 2 weeks and 5 days, I guess it was. And then there's this big final navigation at the end. And it was, just really, really challenging. The terrain that we had, middle of winter in the Rockies, so much snow. And I wasn't prepared for that because I didn't know anyone that had done a SARTEC selection. No one really knew about it. So I didn't make it on the first go. And then I had a second go a couple of years after that and finished that selection, went through that whole selection process again, another 3 weeks. And I finished that selection, but was just deemed unsatisfactory. Okay. So they don't really tell you why, which is an unfortunate part of the selection process. And the best they could say was come back next year. Right. So
at least that's better than you don't need to come back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then I came back and I was like, well, third time's the charm, right? Yeah. And in 2018, then I did my selection for my course, and it went definitely way better than the other times. And just having that knowledge, what to prepare for physically and mentally and studying and all that stuff. And so, yeah.
So going back to growing up, did you play a lot of sports or were you an active kid?
No, that's funny. Kind of like what I was telling you, like I was really a geek in school. Like I think I played a lot of badminton.
Okay. There we go.
I was not, I played outside like a normal kid, but I was definitely more kind of focused in school, and I was more overweight and I was not athletically gifted at all. And and that's why I think once I joined basic and stuff and things were just kind of becoming a little bit more easy and I was having a lot of fun with other people, and kids can be cruel. So like joining sports team as a kid, I wasn't really enjoying it.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't really do any sports. So I pretty much joined the military. And then once I joined, I played badminton, and then I got into everything from that point on, like a lot of climbing, and that was like the big sport for me that kind of helped me and progress and really get into the outdoors.
And that was going to be my next question. Were your parents into camping or outdoorsy stuff growing up at all?
So I mean, we did some camping at campgrounds, but that was it. I wish, I look at these kids nowadays when you're in the Rockies and they're like climbing mountains and all this stuff, but I didn't do any of that stuff. We just weren't exposed to it. Like we was pretty limited to what we were doing. And like, mind you too, like we moved into a farm town. There's not much you can do. You can run around the fields and ride your bike, and that's about it. So
yeah, it is funny now to see pictures of kids out adventuring with their parents. And like, I always played sports and I was an only child, so my dad would be out throwing the ball with me and that sort of thing. But my parents were not outdoorsy. Like, we did not go hiking. My only camping experience would be the same thing, like with my cousins at a campground type thing.
Yeah.
So
I find like, I don't know about you, but like, I feel like sometimes that's what pushes you as you grow up to try all these things. Cause you're like, well, I didn't do it when I was a kid. I don't know what it's like. So then you kind of get into it growing up.
Yeah, exactly. But a couple of years ago, I started reading Ed Viester's books about mountaineering.
Okay.
So he was like the first American to climb all 14 peaks above 8,000 meters without oxygen. And he's done just so much stuff in the mountaineering world. And I'm, sitting in Nova Scotia, like reading this. Oh, this is so cool. I want to try mountaineering. And now that I'm out in BC, I'm like, okay, so
you got to get out now.
I was never into the outdoors when I lived in Nova Scotia, but now in BC, like, it's so beautiful with the mountains everywhere and lakes and it's so interesting.
Yeah, the opportunities are endless.
And then also, so while you were a combat engineer, did you deploy at all?
No, I didn't. So essentially, I came out, when I got to the unit, we were like, they sent the last they had just sent the last roto over, I believe. And then they sent up I think like I don't know, the guys always called it like a cleanup crew.
Okay.
So guys went out there and we're just kind of like tearing apart the fob and stuff. And then I didn't know, so I didn't get a chance to deploy. I mean, a lot of us, wanted to, but
Hmm.
it was where Afghanistan was dying down. They were bringing all the troops back. So
Right. So for combat diver, how long is the selection process for that course?
yeah, so the selection process for combat dive is, how you were saying you could just like put your hand up and like volunteer.
Yeah.
So that's the combat diver selection.
Okay.
But usually you kind of know what you're getting into. So it really depends how they run the selection. And so I ended up, when I left the unit, I was part of organizing the selection process and stuff like that. So I got to see behind the wheels, I guess, what happens. But so at first, so my first combat diver selection was 3 weeks long, and it was quite intensive. But because they had the money for it, they were able to run it that long, and only maybe 5 guys finished. And myself. So I think we finished 6. And then 2 weeks after my first combat diver selection, I was in a car accident and I broke my back.
Oh,
So I couldn't, I obviously couldn't go on a course,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I hadn't done that well on the selection either. Like these other guys were machines, and I wasn't at the top of the list. So I was like, well, you know what, I was going to get a medical release, and eventually kind of got back on my feet. So then I tried out again and finished again, and same thing, was just deemed unsatisfactory. Just couldn't quite pull it together. And then on the third shot, then I was like, came out with a blast, topped the selection, and then I got sent on the course. And then the course was I want to say it's 12 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. And that course runs out of like Gagetown and Halifax.
Right. Yeah. I can remember when I worked at the dive unit in Halifax, seeing some of the combat diver courses go through there.
Yeah.
And I always just found that interesting that there's like a selection to go on that course, because when you go on a ship's diver course, there's no selection. You just submit your paperwork and get signed off by the doctor, and then off you go on your ship's
Oh
diver
yeah.
course.
No,
So,
no, it's a pretty like and I mean, I can only speak for Edmonton. I know that a lot of other units like treated their selection the same way, but we were really really hard on the guys, and like, they were hard on me and I was hard on them, because it's a big pride thing for the
mhm.
unit. Combat divers they're considered a specialty for the combat engineers, and so you're out in the public a little bit more, and you do want to represent your unit well. And if you're an instructor, you want to end up with guys that are going to want to work hard, and you just want to obviously select guys that you want to work with.
Right.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so no, it was definitely pretty challenging, and definitely I got a lot out of it, and eventually helped towards you know the SARTEC selection as well.
So after the car accident, how did you rehabilitate yourself, and what did your workouts look like leading up to that next
Yeah,
selection?
so what you were saying about like sports and stuff. So eventually, so I joined the military. I did my training as a combat engineer. I got posted at Edmonton, and that's kind of like where I like to think my career kind of started. So I was in Edmonton, and then for about a year or so, and then I broke my back, and I had some reconstructive surgery. So I got some rods in there holding everything together, and it was pretty definite that I was going to get a medical release, just because of the extent of the injury and the location.
Hmm.
But because I was young and I was healthy, they hadn't really seen many people with this kind of injury, I guess, at the hospital. And I just kind of slowly would do like home workouts and just walking. I was struggling to run at that point. So I did a lot of walking, just those home videos with little weights and body weight stuff. And that was really challenging for a good year. And that's actually, I got into swimming, and
Okay.
that's kind of like the first sport, I think I say, that I really really got me back into fitness. And swimming honestly like saved my body,
Hmm.
because it's a low impact and you can still do cardio. So I was still getting the impression that I was still able to put in a workout and do a good workout, even if I was still injured. And so I just did lots of swimming and swimming and swimming. And before I knew it, I was waking up and I wasn't hurting, and I could put my socks on. And I was seeing physiotherapists and doing a lot of core workouts to strengthen my core, because that's, just really big stabilizer muscles that would just help healing overall. And swimming was doing that as well. And then yeah, eventually I just kind of ended up competing in swimming for a year, just did lots of training and really enjoyed it. And yeah, so got into swimming. And then after that was like, well, if I can swim, maybe I can do other stuff. And then I started slowly getting into a bit of CrossFit,
Okay.
just like looking
Yeah.
at those like workouts of the day online. I'm like,
Yes. Yeah.
okay, I don't know what a snatch is. I'm just gonna, so I did a course and I got all the basic movements, and I would just do everything like down to like, push-ups were on my knees, and everything was like with bands, and everything was just super easy, or easier, I guess, like the downgraded version.
Right. Yeah.
And then with time, and I mean, it took a lot of time, like I said, like definitely a good year before I could even start properly running and stuff. Just put in the work, every day, and
Yeah.
eventually kind of came out on top and was like, wow, okay, well now I can put, 50, 100 pounds over my head. I think I'm ready to kind of get back in the game. And that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to try for a second dive selection and go on from there.
That's awesome. That's a huge recovery after, from being told that you were going to be medically released, then to getting to that point and just like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to crush it with combat diver and then Sartec after that, because that's definitely not easy on the body.
No, definitely not. And I think that's sort of what, I was like, well, if I can do another dive selection, even if I don't make it on the course, I'm like, then I know that I'm healthy enough
Mm-hmm.
to eventually make it for SAR. And yeah, so I was lucky too. I had like amazing surgeons.
And did you find during the course, did you have any trouble with your back, or were you just kind of good to go?
No, pretty, like, honestly, like I was pretty good to go, just doing a lot of physio. And like when you're on course, you're doing so much physical activity. So
Mm-hmm.
like you're really keeping in shape. And I would just, just the little things, if you sweat the little stuff, then the big stuff becomes easier, I think. So I would just make sure I was always, lifting properly, not lifting with my back, just, silly things like that. And no, I ended up, it's pretty good. And even now, like I still see physiotherapists and stuff like that. And just kind of to keep me, I guess, at the top of my game.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still doing core exercises. I'm still doing all the basic stuff that everyone does on it or tries to do on a day-to-day basis when they're, recuperating, and lots of yoga, and just try to maintain flexibility and strength. And it's not too bad. I mean, I still get sore, especially
Mm-hmm.
with all the vibrations on the aircraft. It definitely, hits your body, but that's part of the job too.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a neat thing now that in the fitness industry, it's kind of getting popularized more now, the recovery side of things, where people are doing ice baths and saunas and
Oh yeah, it's a
um,
big trend.
yeah, all of that stuff, which is good because I find in the past it was sort of like no pain, no gain, the more you hurt, like the better you're doing. But now,
Yeah, there's no such thing as overworking out.
yeah, exactly. And so one of the people that I really follow for fitness is Laird Hamilton and his wife, Gabby Reese. So he's a world famous big wave surfer, and his
Okay.
wife used to be a professional volleyball player. So they have this company now called XPT Life. They do these crazy pool workouts where they breath hold, go down to the bottom of the pool, do running with weights and stuff like that. And they're like huge on the recovery side of things too. So, and I see lots of
Yeah.
other fitness companies and individuals sort of promoting that. So I think that's definitely something, especially for people in a more physical line of work, like it's something that's so essential to do,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. You're
um
investing in yourself, really.
exactly, yeah, it's that longevity, right? When you do implement those recovery procedures, it's just prolongs your work life, right? So
Oh yeah, absolutely.
what sort of workouts did you do to prepare for SAR selection? And not even just workouts, like did you train navigation skills on your own and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, like my first selection, I didn't really know kind of what to expect, and I had come from the dive world, so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do the dive stuff, because thinking like the selection is gonna be run like in the same physical way, and in a lot of parts it was, you're still doing hundreds and thousands of flutter kicks and push-ups and
Mm-hmm.
all really close intervals and stuff like that. So high intensity intervals was like, that's pretty much what selection is for days on end, and then with some long events in between. So I did my first year, I hired like a personal trainer,
Okay.
and I just kind of went online, and he was a guy that kind of specialized in training for like special forces, search and rescue, CSOR, that kind of selection.
Okay.
And so he kind of like built a program, and I did that, but I didn't know much about the selection. So I didn't do any skills like you mentioned, like nav or anything like that. I didn't really do that. And then after having done selection the first time, I was like, okay,
Right.
now I know what I have to work on.
Yeah.
So then I worked. So the biggest thing was rucking. So that was the hardest part for me, because when you're on selection, you're rucking with, I mean, one of the guys picked me up and then he picked up his rucksack and he was like, they weighed the same.
The same. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess because most people are listening, they're kind of listening on, they don't get the video. So I'm about 5'5" and I weigh 130 pounds. So it's really not, mass moves mass.
Mm-hmm.
And on selection, you end up with your rucksack is weighing over 100 pounds. So for me, like training was just like a lot of it was incorporating strength and definitely just like a lot of rucking just to get kind of used to that weight and be able to move with it. And then I did do nabs on my own. Like I'd print out a map of like the Alberta Rockies and I'm like, pick a point and I'm like, okay, I'm going to park here. And then I'm going to go from this point to this point, and then I'm going to cut down a bunch of trees. I'm going to set up a shelter for the night. I'm going to start a fire, and I'm just going to survive and make myself like really comfortable and try to thrive in that environment. And then I'm like, hey, and then I'm just going to navigate back the next day, and we all do our navigation. It's all just compass.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
no fancy GPS and
now,
Google Maps.
No, now we do, but
Yeah.
not on selection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely did a lot of that. And then eventually for my my final selection, I was so lucky. One of the PSP guys, Rich Stouffer, shout out. So he's one of the PSP guys in Edmonton, and he's like, yeah, I was spending every morning at the gym, every afternoon at the gym, weekends at the gym. So I was seeing this guy all the time, and I knew he was kind of like, he'd help guys with different programs, guys that would go on for special forces and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, hey, I'd like to do your SARTEC like pre-selection program. So he had kind of one of those programs preset. And then, so essentially like most of the time, as it was like every day, I was lucky enough, I would usually do like a workout in the morning. And so usually it was like a ruck or a run in the morning. And then I would, just go to work till noon, and then noon to probably 5 o'clock. It was just training 5 days a week. And just with him and just doing lots of strength and lots of like Metcons and just like a lot of running, functional fitness, a lot of CrossFit movements, just strengthening shoulders, core, legs. He really set us up for success.
That's awesome.
So definitely got a lot of help.
Yeah, I mean, and PSP is such a great asset to have when there is someone who really knows what they're doing in that sense and can help people work their way up to going on those selections and courses.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Did you focus on your nutrition at all as well?
So I, that's kind of always been like one of my weakness, and I'm still like trying to figure that out because, every body is so different, and like working with all these guys, and like most of the guys, if you took a picture of like the guys on my course, like everyone's bigger than me.
Right.
So what works for them doesn't always work for me. So I've still been juggling a lot. I would just like tack on the protein. And that was pretty much it, because when you're working out 25 hours, 30 hours a week, and you're swimming and it's not just short strength stuff, you do strength and then you're doing like a 3-hour workout, and then you're going for a 1-hour ruck, and then you're doing short high intensity sprints with weights. And so it's like all sorts of just varied fitness. So unfortunately, I would just eat as much as possible. Yeah. That's really all it was. It was just take in as many calories as you can, because at that point, there was no bad calories. It was all just getting burnt.
Yeah. I mean, that's so much time working out, right? And especially with those workouts that are such a long grind, like you need the calories to maintain those energy levels and to be able to get through those workouts.
Yeah. But like, I guess my diet was mainly, lots of protein shakes. Well, maybe not lots, but protein shakes and chicken, rice, veggies, the classic.
Yes. Exactly. So what did you find the most challenging part of selection? Was it more the physical side or the mental side for you?
For me, it was definitely more the physical side of things. Because like I said, like I'm not very big, and the guys were everyone was moving faster than I was. Mm-hmm. And through all these selection processes, I discovered that I'm an endurance athlete. Any event that was over 45 minutes, then that's when I would start doing well. But at first, the first week of selection, they don't have those long events. It's like sprint to there, sprint back, get in the pool, hold your breath. And it was just like, do a bunch of flutter kicks, do a bunch of push-ups, do a bunch of pull-ups, you know, do some sprints here and some sprints there. And I was never in the top guys. Like those guys were just always ahead. So I found that was like really challenging. And I guess in a sense it does hit your mental attitude, because you're like, well, I'm never in the front. I'm never in the front. Mm-hmm. But then you stick it out long enough, and like a 3-week selection, that's 21 days of just beating up your body, running around with a rucksack in the mountains, post-holing in the snow, just like, it's so much like, and even when you don't have your rucksack on, you have a tack vest on. So they give you this, you know, they give you like the Army standard tack vest, and you have to carry on you at all times all these like essential items. So you've got like flashlights, you've got like these shovels and tools, and you have an axe, and you have your, you know, all your stuff that you're always carrying around. So you're never just running around in your clothes. You just always have stuff on you. And 21 days is really long. But yeah, so after the first week, when you start, so you do the first week in Edmonton. That's kind of like the standard way selection goes. First week's in Edmonton, where you do all your physical testing. So you have to do like an official PT test to get on the selection. Okay. You know, when you go through the selection process, you apply, I guess, the application process. And then when you get on you get on selection, then you have to do another PT test. So you do like, it's a 2.4K run, followed by, oh my God, I should definitely know this by heart, followed by 31 push-ups, 33 sit-ups, 8 chin-ups. You do 250 meter like shuttle sprints back and forth. Okay. And then you climb a rope twice, and you have, it's either 16 or 17 minutes to do all of that, the run plus everything together. And so that's the test that you do when you get on selection. So they do that in Edmonton, and then sometimes they make you do like the old forces, like beep test. Right. And they teach you some like a lot of navigation stuff, and they teach all these skills that if you stay on selection, you're going to end up using. Right. Okay. Because you can come in as a clerk not knowing how to ever have navigated. They will teach everyone down to the same level. And then when they ask you something, it's like they have already taught you. Right. So that way everyone has an opportunity to pass selection, even if they didn't learn those skills in their prior trade. Yeah. And obviously like your experience like absolutely helps. For sure, like, you know, we have guys that were ex-special forces, and they obviously did very, very well in the navigation stuff. Yeah. But because they, you know, but then there's the survival things, which, you know, starting a fire, those infantry guys, they don't start fires out there. Yeah. So then they teach everyone the same way how to start a fire. And then when they ask you, and that's the thing on selections, like you always have tests. Everyone gets taught at the same level, and then you're expected to meet that standard that they taught you for the test. Right. But so I guess what I'm saying, you get a week in Edmonton, and then you spend 2 weeks in Jarvis Lake, which is like our big training facility out in the Rockies. It's between like Jasper. It's like in the close to the Jasper National Park. So you're in the mountains, you're in the snow, you know, and the selections always happen in January, February. And I don't know if you spent much time in Alberta, but in those months it is cold. It is snowy. Yeah, I haven't spent much time in Alberta, but I remember watching that show, Truth, Duty, Valor. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, on TV, and I remember watching the StarTech one. Just, oh my God, that looks so miserable. Just so much snow, and it just looked so freezing cold. Don't do well in the cold, and I'm always just like, oh, that just looks so brutal. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you're not cold very often because you're always running around. Yeah, well, I guess that's true too. Yeah. So no, like, you know, just to really kind of conclude, I guess, on your question, I think the physical part was definitely the most challenging for me. But, you know, once we got out to that Jarvis Lake portion and the events, you know, they wake you up in the middle of the night, you don't have a lot of sleep. Mm-hmm. And then they're asking you to run, you know, 10 kilometers to a checkpoint, and to answer all these StarTech questions along the way, and then to memorize a bunch of stuff, and then to run 10K back, or, you know, whatnot. That's when I was kind of like a bit more of an advantage, because also, like, when you're on selection, everyone gets, you know, you're eating rations. So everyone gets the same amount of calories. Right. And being smaller, those calories for me felt like they were going a longer way. Yes. So I guess that I felt like a bit of an advantage. Yeah. And it is harder
for women generally, because we're smaller, right? Like you said, you're only 130 pounds. Like if you're carrying a 100-pound backpack, that's so much different than a guy who's like 215 or 200, right?
Oh
It's
yeah.
such a bigger percentage of your body weight.
Oh yeah, especially like when you're post-holing in like snow on like a 45-degree angle slope. It's I could definitely see the difference. And I just, I did my best, and then at things that I was better at, or everything else, I would just work really 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 hard at it to show these guys like, no, it's an advantage to have me on your team. Like, yeah, okay, I might not be as fast as you guys, but once we get there, I will put in so much extra work. And like, I just kind of made myself valuable,
Right.
and made myself like, what I could control, I did make myself as prepared as possible.
So then after your selection, then the course starts, which I think that the SARTEC course is probably one of the coolest courses in the Canadian Forces, because you get to do diving, you do jumping, you do like alpine skills, rappelling, all that kind of stuff. So tell me about the course a little bit.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just kind of start. So I remember when I was a combat engineer, and I was in Edmonton, and I had a friend and that had just come back from the SARTEC course. And I had a friend that had just come back from the clearance diving course. And I asked the SARTEC, I was like, how was your last year? And the answer was, that was the best year of my life.
Yeah.
And then I turned to the clearance diver and I was like, how was your last year? And he was like, that was the worst year of my life. So I was like, okay, I think I'm heading the right direction. So how it starts essentially, so you get, so I was in Edmonton and I got posted to Comox in the summer. And then you get to Comox and you get a couple weeks to kind of settle in, find your way around the base, get all your kit issued, that kind of stuff. And then you start with the medical phase. So the idea is that the medical phase is one of the most challenging phases that you do on the SARTEC course. So they put it at the beginning so that if someone was to struggle and fail the medical phase, at least they're not failing at the end of the course after they've put all this money and training into them.
Yeah.
So what we do is we get a primary care paramedic qualification at the end of, it took us, we do in about 3 months, a course that a civilian would take about 6 months. We focus a lot more on trauma side of things, like things that we would actually encounter out in the wilderness. Like, you're not really going to encounter many like elderly women suffering from delusions and stuff like that.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not. I mean, we could probably figure it out. But so you start with the medical phase, which is wicked. Like, we have GIBC, which is they teach paramedics. They're a great institute. It's the Justice Institute of British Columbia, I guess it is. So they teach us. So they're civilian instructors, but they kind of got the, they know how the program works and stuff like that. And so we're still military. We show up every day in the morning, and we always have like PT, like as a group during that phase anyways. And then, we go do our physical training, and then we come back, we shower, everything, and then we get into school. So pretty much we're into school for those first 3 months. And it's like all day, you finish at 5, you go eat supper, and then you come back to the school, and then you're kind of like just with your peers, and you're practicing scenarios, and you're asking each other questions, you're prepping for exams. And then there's just like a couple exams. So you get practical exams where you get given a scenario, and you have to follow the proper protocol that you've learned, administer the proper drugs and the proper dose, follow the proper sequence, make like good, sound medical decisions. And then we also have like written exams. And so you do a couple of those. And then once you pass that, you go to Winnipeg and you do, well, we went to Winnipeg, different courses go to different areas. And that's where you do your like on-car shift. You spend 4 weeks in an ambulance with like 2 other paramedics, and then they teach you, or not really teach you, but you get to actually practice on real people, right? So that was wicked for me. Like, I was lucky enough, I was kind of like downtown Winnipeg, and Winnipeg at the time was the like murder capital of Canada.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it's unfortunate that you want trauma, but that's what
helps you learn.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was lucky enough. I had like a couple really good calls. I mean, we got so many stories, but there's a paramedic out there, and she was with me on car, and she was just wicked. She had been a paramedic for so long, and I learned so much from her, because like, we do things in the search and rescue world differently because we're on our own, we're remote, and we only have like limited amount of gear. We don't have a truck full
Yeah.
right there
Yeah,
all the
exactly.
time. So she taught me so much. And I remember we had this one call, we got called to this really shady spot in Winnipeg. And we roll in, we get called for like a young male with a broken leg. And we go to this building, which we'd been at like before, and it was just usually a lot of drug cases and stuff like that. And we walk in, and so it's me, it's Dory, and this other paramedic that really didn't enjoy much of his job. He was just there for the paycheck,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Probably wouldn't have been the most fun to ride along with.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, and we show up, and this guy, and he's just kind of like laying there, and I'm just like, hey, like, what's up? And he's like, I broke my leg. And I'm just like, okay. So I kind of examined this, and this is like one of my first times like really interacting with a patient and having like running my first call.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of like, going through my head to toe. So I'm like, okay, well, there are no massive bleeds. His airway is fine.
Yeah.
Nose is fine. And, just going through my evaluation, and then I get to his leg, and I barely touch his leg, and he screams like to death. And I'm just like, okay, well, this guy is clearly high on something. He's like hallucinating, and we're just going to like load him up in the stretcher and get him out of there. But before we did that, I asked the senior paramedic, I was like, hey, can you have a look at this guy? And like, he's complaining of like his leg, but he won't really like let me touch him that much. And he's just yelling like crazy. So the senior paramedic goes to see him, and like touches his leg. He's like, no, his leg's fine. Anyway, so we stand this guy up, and sure enough, like his leg was just kind of like dangling on this really, really odd angle, and he had like ruptured his femur. Like the bottom bone, like the bone below the kneecap, went through and like split his femur. So we just kind of, everyone looked at each other. We're like, okay, well, let's get this guy downstairs. And so we get him kind of out of that apartment. And in school, we get taught to apply traction to a mid-femur, like a mid-closed femur fracture.
Mm-hmm.
And we get, it's so by the book in school. They're like, you're going to apply traction. So essentially like pull on this guy's leg with like a stabilizing device that'll like hold that tension. So we get taught like, hey, you're going to pull traction until you see relief on this guy's face. And so I'm in the ambulance, and I'm just thinking, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of my training. I'm like, I'm going to apply traction until I see relief on his face. And we get this, device on him, and it's kind of like a crutch, and his leg is just in between these two crutches, and it just kind of like at the foot, there's just like almost like a rope, and you pull it, and it's wrapped around the ankle. So it just pulls the ankle away from the pelvis, and it just supposed to like almost like straighten the bone.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm like, okay, here we go. And I start pulling, and I'm pulling, and I'm pulling, and this guy is just yelling the whole time. And I'm like, this is not what they taught us in school. But so anyways, I ended up like maxing out the device, and I just see like relief on this guy's face. And I was just like, this is exactly what they taught us in school. So it was wicked. That was probably like my first really deal with like medicine, like one-on-one, and to see, like an action create such a big difference. Like we hadn't even given this guy pain meds or nothing. And it was like, I was able to provide relief for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And right away, like I was hooked like to the medicine from then on. And ever since, it's been like a pretty big passion of mine, just studying all the time and trying to make that the backbone of everything, which it is. Like we're pararescue men, but what we study is paramedicine. So we really kind of try to have a really strong medical background. So that's the medical portion. So that's like the first 4 months.
Yeah, that's so condensed, right? Because when you think of college programs, most of them are 2 years for that.
Yeah, we get trained, like a lot of stuff they omit, right? Like I said, like we're not always going to run into certain, like what civilian paramedics run into. Mm-hmm. So they omit some of that stuff out, which helps kind of shorten the course a little bit too. So yeah, so then after the medic phase, then we're already in Winnipeg. So we have a hyperbaric chamber there. So we do some training with regards to just like altitude training, how you would deal with just a high altitude or very, very fast, like airplane, like let's say like the windows were to blow out, what kind of symptoms you would see in yourself for hypoxia. So they stick you in this chamber. they essentially like bring you to like altitude, and then they see, you get to see what you're like in a chamber and get to see if you can recognize your own signs of hypoxia and turn on your O2. And like most Sartex or Alpha, I was just like, I'm going to go as far as I can. So yeah, I pretty much, I went, like they give you these little drawings. And so you're in this chamber and you're doing these little drawings, these little puzzles or whatever. And then they're like, okay, is everyone back on oxygen? And I was like, no, I'm still on. Like, I still have my oxygen on. And the guy's like, no, you passed out and I turned on your oxygen. And I was like, that's not true. That's not true. Yeah. And then they replayed the video and I was like, whoa, I had no idea.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I wonder, since it is sort of that alpha trait, I wonder how many people do that.
Yeah, I was told I wasn't the first, but you could tell like they had tried. They were like, don't push it too far. Don't push it too far. And I was just like, I kind of want to know the limits of my body and like what it's going to feel like. So yeah. I got some good training, valuable training out of it, to say the least.
Nice.
So yeah, so then essentially at that point we hit Christmas. We come back from Christmas and then we do our dive training. So we head to Victoria in BC, and we do, is it 1 or 2 months? We do like, I think it's about 4 weeks.
Okay.
We do, and they, same thing, they take everyone like at the most basic level and they teach you absolutely everything. So we do our dive phase out there, which was really, really great for us. We got good weather and we were able to do like a lot of diving. Unfortunately, a lot of the dives were really short. So you kind of have to wait till you get to your unit eventually to get more training on the gear. And we got new gear brought in, like all that Cabalite system.
Right. Yeah.
Was just getting switched over. So there was a lot of issues with the gear, which we're still dealing with now. So we do that dive training. And then, so that we do like 4 weeks with like the clearance divers, right? Like the subject matter experts. And then we do a week with the Sartex. And then the Sartex are like, okay, well, in the search and rescue part of it, of diving, this is how we do. So we used to do confined diving. So essentially like go under ships. And, if there was a rescue, if someone was in an air bubble, but right now that's been shut down. There's been, like accidents, incidences. And so right now we're just kind of like doing open water dives for rescue purposes if needs be. So after the dive phase, let's see, we go up to the Arctic, I believe. Yes. Yeah. So we go up to the Arctic for about 2 weeks, and then we do some survival training out there. So we learn, just like how to build igloos and snow shelters, how to like live in tents in extremely cold temperatures. And we're living outside like 24/7. So there's no relief of going into a warm building. You really get to adapt to the environments. And that's a huge thing in our trade. Like depending where you're posted, if you're posted in Winnipeg and you get dropped off in the Arctic, you jump in, there's no building, there's nothing, like it's you and your gear. Yeah. So we spent about 2 weeks in the Arctic, then we come back, we go to Lake Louise in Alberta, and we do a winter mountain phase. So we do some ice climbing, we do some like crevice rescue stuff, like obviously a lot of like rigging, like rope rigging, lots of rescue stuff. And then we do some skiing as well, and just like learning to navigate terrain and learning to ski. Yeah, so that's pretty wicked. And then we go on, we come back, and I think that's when we do our jump phase. Yeah, so in between all that, sometimes we do like ground stuff too, just learning like search and rescue skills, in between kind of those phases that, just to kind of like fill in time, just like stuff like extrication, like how would you pull someone out of an aircraft? What tools would you use? Where is the battery? Where would you find the ELT, and just like little things like that. So usually around April timeframe, we head down to Arizona with all our instructors, and they get a bunch of Sartex from all over the country that are like really good at jumping and that are jump instructor qualified. They join us, and then we do weeks. I think we do 6 weeks of jumping. So we just jump between like, I want to say 3 to 5 times a day. And awesome. Yeah, really hot, really, really hot.
Is that all free fall, or do you do any static line on that as well?
Yeah, so we start off static line because operationally as Sartex, we can only deploy on static line. So we start off static line, and so we learn to pack our chutes. We all pack our own chutes. We do static line. We do a bunch of jumps like that, and then we move on and we do free fall. And so, like, which is awesome as well. But the advantage for us for free fall too is it's just everything's faster. So it's faster to pack your chute, and you get more time in the air. So you get more skills learned in less amount of time.
Right.
And it's a huge advantage having those, all those jump skills behind you, because eventually you get to your unit and you're asked to jump out of an aircraft going 130 knots to go find some hunters that have, broken legs or whatever medical emergency. Your job is to get on the ground safely, and you can't become a casualty. So yeah, our jump phase is wicked. We just, and the thing is, like, the winds in Arizona, they start to build up usually after lunchtime. So we would be waking up usually 4 a.m. at sunlight, we're jumping, and usually by noon we're done jumping. So you still have like your day.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, to go enjoy. And there's lots of climbing down there. We were doing a lot of climbing, and yeah, that was really great training. Then we come back to Canada. We go to Jasper. We do some summer mountain training. So most of that consists of rigging. So we do just lots of rigging for all types of scenario. Essentially, like, okay, what if we're 2 StarTechs? We have to go down and get this one guy, and we have to bring him up. What if we're 2 StarTechs? One of us has to go down, but we have to bring him down. What if we're 3 or 4 or 5 and we have to bring this gear, and we got to go down to this ledge? And like, I'm sure you can appreciate all the different mountain terrains you can ever come. There's just so much out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we learned like big principles, like how to rig system, pulley systems, and how to save ourselves too if we get caught in trouble. And after that summer mountain phase, we go to, so we're already like in the Rockies at that point. We're in Jasper. Then we head to Jarvis Lake, which is like where essentially, so I hadn't been to Jarvis Lake until I had finished selection the year before.
Right.
And Jarvis Lake is usually like, there's a lot of bad memories there because you go through selection and it's grueling, you're exhausted, and it's just really tough. And then when you go there in the summer, it's just like night and day. It's a beautiful area. And like, they've built it up to be such a really, really good training facilities, I guess. And then we do what's called like ground ops and our final phase. So ground ops is like, we'll learn to just like drive quads around, how to like use chainsaws if ever like we had to like clear like a landing area, just like all basic stuff. We use boats, we build rafts, we swim, those kind of basic bushman skills, I guess you call.
Yeah.
And then we do our final phase. So the final phase, essentially, you go in the morning, you get a brief. Okay, this is the mission. And so they just give you like a simulated mission. And as a team, it's like, okay, you guys are going to jump into this area, and this is what you're looking for. This is the patient's situation. And then you kind of have to like talk to your course mates, and we're like, okay, we're going to jump here. We're going to coordinate bringing this gear and this gear and this gear. And then we're going to extract via this route, stuff like that. So they put essentially everything you've learned. They put all the medicine back into the situation, and they put jumping in there, obviously. And then you have rescue systems like, okay, you're going to go, and this mission is like, this guy is on a cliff ledge. So now you got to go dig back to those mountain skills that you learned and apply that along with the medicine. And then we graduate and we get posted.
Nice. So how much planning goes into, I'm sure that big final phase, you probably had maybe more time to plan than you would on maybe like a real life rescue operation.
Yeah, for sure. So when we were on course, I mean, we don't really know how the system works, right? Like, you're so new to the search and rescue, and like, we've just learned our skills. We don't know anything about aircrafts or anything like that. So when we're on course, like, most of the planning for us was really just gear. Like, okay, what gear are we going to bring that we're going to need or whatnot to make the situation work? So we did definitely have a lot more time to think about it. Here, we get called out, and if you get called out during the week, like, there's certain hours, we have certain response times. But like, last week I was in the chopper, and the sat phone rings, and they're say, oh, there's this hiker and he's injured. So within 50, sometimes it can be like 15 minutes. I've even heard some guys are like 5 minutes away, and there's no planning. But sometimes it's better that way because you don't overthink it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So on course, you don't do too much of the planning. I feel like it's mainly done by the instructors when they're
Okay.
kind of like tailoring you towards like, okay, this is what you guys are going to be doing. And then we organize like, yeah, really more gear intensive, I guess is what I'd say.
And then, so before you had done your course, had you ever gone skydiving or were you into any sort of mountaineering as well?
Yeah, so I didn't with regards to skydiving, I did this one jump once just because I kind of wanted to know what it felt like and I
Mm.
wanted to know that I wasn't going to be terrified to jump
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Discover you hate it.
Yeah.
Maybe your StarTech was the
Yeah.
wrong route.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, I liked it. So we were good. But I just did the one jump and I was like, well, I'm not going to pay because it is really
It
expensive,
is, yeah.
right? And so I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to put my money into mountaineering.
Okay.
So I just kind of more so went towards, I guess, the climbing side of things. I was like, I'm going to get a really good basis in climbing, rock climbing, and then kind of try to go into mountaineering from there. So I started, I used to climb, like Edmonton has amazing climbing gyms. So I'd climb indoors with my partner. Like we would go, sometimes we'd go 5-6 times a week. And then we'd head out to the Rockies and we just kind of like taught ourselves, like
Yeah.
looking at videos and books and just kind of like meeting other people out, on the rock, just kind of like learning different routes. So I really, really got into climbing in that sense. And then had a little bit of mountaineering experience, but really not much, just had dealt with ropes a lot. And then also like it's so gear intensive to like
Right.
climb and
Yeah.
mountaineer and do
There's
all
so
this.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? I'll just do like a couple little things. And then once I'm a StarTech, I'll have all the gear and then I can kind of like go on my own. So since then I've climbed, like I was in France last summer and I did Mont Blanc up there with another StarTech. And you do some mountaineering on course, so like you practice just like how you would rope up to go up glaciers and stuff like that. So not a lot of experience, but definitely spent a lot of time on the rock. That's for sure.
I was just watching a YouTube series about rescue in Chamonix and Mont Blanc, and it was crazy the amount of calls. I guess they're not really strict over there. Like people just go up and they'll start climbing and skiing. A lot of skiers falling into crevasses. So they had, the operations center and the guy would answer the phone. And they'd be like, oh, yes, my partner just fell into a crevasse. We're at this location. And off the helicopter would go and they'd pick this guy up. They'd drop him at the hospital. Meanwhile, they're getting another call where they'd be like leaving guys at one location to go pick up someone else and drop them at the hospital. And then they'd go back and pick up the other guys. Like, it was constant. It was crazy.
Well, and the thing too with the Alps and with Chamonix is like the backcountry is so much more accessible. Like they have gondolas that'll go like, so, you're like already, you start thousands of feet in the air and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, backcountry is accessible. Yeah. So anyone can just go out and like not really knowing what they're doing. But like in Canada, if you want to go to a glacier in the summer, like you're doing a lot of it's like a really big commitment.
Yeah.
So not a lot of people just throw themselves at it.
Yeah. With the climbing, do you find that helps? Because I feel like one of the most common problems as a woman doing sort of like these physical trades and jobs is the upper body strength. I feel like that would have helped you for the rope climbing and the pull-ups and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like that's been like, I found compared to like all the other guys, like it's like these guys could like not work out for 8 weeks and then get on a pull-up bar and just like crank out 30 pull-ups. Yeah. And I'm just like, what?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, climbing. Yeah, absolutely. It was a huge advantage and definitely an advantage, upper body strength. And then like mental game, huge. Cause like when you're leading a route and you're looking at like potentially like a very, very bad fall, like if you're gonna, you're climbing this face and if you fall, like your legs are gonna break, but it's like, this is within my scope. Like I can do this. This is within my level, like my fitness level. So you definitely learn to override these, just these fears that kind of come over you and definitely plays a big part in the mental game for sure. And like same thing when you're like scrambling or you're mountaineering and you get really, really high up, you're like, okay, well, I'm safe here. Like my feet aren't going to slip, but if I do slip, the consequences are dire.
I found it interesting. Like I went and did Mount Rainier last year, but it was with a guided route. But it was so neat because we started at 1 a.m. climbing up So you're climbing and it's just dark and you have your headlamps, and then it sort of got light as we got to the top. And then as we're climbing down, then that's when you can really see like, oh, wow, we were climbing past these huge ice walls and like there's a big crevasse here and there. And you start seeing all the stuff that you were, when they're like, oh, we have to move really quickly in this section, then you know why.
Yeah. Were you guys, you guys must have been all roped up, or you roped up in 3?
We were roped up. They started off with 4, and then I don't know, I didn't enjoy it as much as I like the mountaineering side of it, but it was just there were so many people and I think a lot of them weren't prepared for it. So there's like Camp Muir, which is at about 10,000 feet, so we go stay there for the night and then get up at 1 to start climbing.
Right.
And you know, a lot of people have it as like, oh, this has been my goal for the past 5 years or whatever. And so we roped up and we start going, and then one guy had to turn around because he couldn't make it. And then we get past this point called the disappointment cleaver, which is basically just like you've still got your crampons on, but you're like scrambling over all this, basically just over all these rocks. And it's like an hour and a half of that. And then at the other side, they're like, okay, this is basically the point of no return. From here, you're committed to going to the summit and then coming back down. And we can't go slow because we've got to hit there at a certain time. Can everyone continue? And everyone's like, yeah. So then we start going, and 20 minutes later, they're like, okay, move off to the side. So then I'm there waiting in waist deep snow while they're rejigging the rope crews because 3 or 4 people had to go back down. So that
you're was just like, guys, get your stuff together.
Yeah. And coming from like sort of, I guess, that military
discipline
where everyone's usually like, okay, we're just going to go and do this, which is kind of why I'd like to get into it more and then be with people who sort of know what they're doing and are more fit. But it was kind of interesting because this one guy in my group, when he got to the summit, he was like, oh, today's my 50th birthday. And he was the fittest one there. So I was
awesome.
Like, oh, that's super cool.
Yeah, there's definitely like wicked people out there, eh?
Super inspiring to see, for sure. All right. So one thing I think is kind of neat about SARTEC is that I think a lot of people don't realize that it's the military that does a lot of the search and rescue, because you hear of, oh, don't go out in your boat in a storm because the Coast Guard will have to come rescue you. And people think that it's the Coast Guard that's going to pluck you out of the water in a helicopter, but really it's the SARTECs.
Yeah. Well, so I think I was thinking about that too earlier today because I was talking to one of the guys at work. And it's not, I guess it's just like, unless you look into it, really, it's kind of hard to understand the whole system, how it works, because especially like the States is like completely different. Like every country is so different. It's not like a set way. So as Canada has a federal mandate to provide a search and rescue asset. So we are that asset. As the Canadian Armed Forces, we're part of the Air Force, and we are that asset. Search and rescue units spread out throughout Canada. But we're not always the first line. So the Coast Guard can come and get you on their boats, which they do. Like they do a lot of rescues too, like especially here out on the East Coast. And sometimes a rescue is just towing a boat in, right? Yeah. So but like if you go out, and the biggest difference between us and like private companies or subsidized companies, like, is the capability of our aircrafts is just unreal. It's incomparable to any other aircrafts out there. Like we have the best aircrafts to hoist down, and we just have so much power. We can get to like all these areas. Yeah. So chances are, like you said, if someone's coming to get you and they're wearing an orange jumpsuit, it's a search and rescue technician from the Canadian Armed Forces.
Yes. Yeah. My friend, her family, she actually comes from a family of lobster fishermen and PEI. And she's in the military now, but her brother was fishing and their boat capsized and they were all sitting on top of it just to stay afloat. And it was the SARTECs that came in and rescued them. Yeah.
I found on the East Coast here is like, there's such a big area to cover, and there's not always that many assets. Like there's one provincial asset, so they're like a fixed wing aircraft and they can do like medevacs, but anything other than that, we're the only asset here. But like if you look like on the West Coast, I know like a friend of mine, he operates like Squamish Volunteer Search and Rescue. So he gets like funded privately, and if there's a call out, he can get called out. It's not always the military getting called out, but here chances are, like if the weather's bad and you're out in the middle of nowhere, like we're coming to get you. And the population being also so small, like I've ran into people, like we have family days or days where we kind of like, we try to like really work with the community here a lot, I find, on the East Coast. So we'll do events like with other, like last year we did a EMS competition. So it was like the firefighters versus the police officers versus the paramedics versus the SARTECs.
Oh,
So like
nice.
we're in the community. Yeah. And then
Yeah,
we'll
that's
just
neat.
kind of like, we'll land the helicopter, out, in this park where we're doing all these events or whatnot. And people come up to you and be like, oh, you picked up my uncle. He had he was having a heart attack on the ship. And I was like, well, I don't remember it. Like maybe I didn't pick him up, but I mean, I hope he made it.
Yeah. Yeah. Small world, especially on the
Yeah.
East Coast.
Yeah. And like we do get world-class training. I mean, it's all I know, I guess. So, but the people here, they teach you so well. And I think it's a big thing is also a lot of people don't realize is you do a year of training on course and you're expected to be, you're a search and rescue technician. So you're like, you come out of course and you're just like, I'm wicked. I know everything. You get to your unit and you realize you know nothing.
Yeah.
You know nothing about the system, how it works on the aircraft. Because like you can get posted in Winnipeg and you're working on the Herc. So you're working on a big transport, well, essentially, what most people, I guess, like a Herc is kind of like was 767 or whatnot, like a really big aircraft. And that's all you do is you're working on the aircraft. But you can get posted to Gander, where I am here in Newfoundland, and we just have the cormorant. We just operate out of a helicopter. So they don't teach you any of that stuff on course. You know how to do your medical training and your mountain training, and you know how to do everything from the moment you get out of the aircraft.
Right.
But being part of the air crew and operating that, well, not operating the aircraft, but operating within that aircraft and learning, how it works and how to hoist gear. And that's your means of extraction. You have to be aware of like the whole process. You don't know any of that stuff when you finish course. So you get to your unit and you're like, okay, I know nothing. And now you almost like restart from scratch.
Yeah, it's like an extra period of on-the-job training, I guess.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly what it is. So like when you get to your unit, you're what's called an RTM, a restricted team member.
Okay.
So SARTECs, I don't know if you know, but so SARTECs, when they deploy out of an aircraft, you have two SARTECs. So you have a team leader and a team member. A team leader being the more experienced senior guy, kind of usually like, sergeant, warrant, and then a team member being a master corporal. So you finish your course, you're considered a restricted team member. You go to your unit and then they teach you everything about the aircraft. So you learn how to hoist out of the aircraft, how to like con the aircraft, because you have to be able to land into tricky areas and you're part of that crew. Like, okay, I'm in this left window. My job is to clear this side of this area that we're trying to land in and make sure the rotors don't hit anything. And then just learning how to get different types of gear out of the aircraft, how to package people inside the aircraft. And then just like all these skills that you don't get taught on course, you learn at your unit. And then after, a certain amount of hours on the aircraft, you do like, we call it a check ride. So someone comes and essentially assesses, what you've learned and can you be safe in the aircraft? Can you operate as like a fully operational team member? And so from that point on, you pass your check ride and then you're a team member. So then you're officially qualified as a SARTEC, because when you get to your unit, you're just flying as a third man. So there's always two qualified SARTECs and then you're the third guy on. And then they're always teaching you. And then after you've done your check ride, then now you can just go to being like two in the aircraft.
Right. Okay. So it's almost like you're on the ride-alongs again.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the aircraft. So
yeah.
That Herc in Winnipeg, is that for, do they cover the northern regions?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So because like that aircraft can cover so much area, so much ground area, that's the reason. So their biggest area of operation would be like the north. I had a friend of mine just before Christmas. He jumped in. There was, I believe it was like a hunter or something. Someone got shot or something like that. And so they jumped in out there. And then I'm not sure how they were recovered, but yeah, that's their area, right? Because if you had a helicopter out there, I mean, there's no way it could cover that much of an area that quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, were there ever any moments, I guess, during your training or during work where you felt like, oh, this is a pretty hairy, risky situation to be in?
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't really felt like that much yet because I'm still new and I haven't had like a lot of really, I guess, like challenging missions yet. So I've got a lot of like missions, but maybe because the guys I'm with, we just kind of talk about it before. We just kind of like, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, we're going to pick this guy up. We're going to get a set of vitals. And if he's fine, we're going to get him in this basket. We're going to hoist them up, and we get into these, like, I wouldn't say hairy situations, like tricky situations maybe like usually, but it's like because we're so trained for it, we're just like, okay, well, we're just take a breath and have a second. And like this, like, I was hoisting this one guy with broken ribs, and all of a sudden we couldn't see anything. We were stuck in a snowball, the effect of the aircraft. So it's like, well, I can't really see anything. And I'm like hoisting this guy out on a cable. Like I'm hoping the aircraft isn't doing anything crazy. And it's like nothing crazy. And we hoist onto boats here a lot on the East Coast, which is where a lot of the hairy missions like will come from. Like a lot of guys, they'll get really, they call them like dirty boats. So like you imagine like a fishing vessel like out to sea, Sea State 8, and like there's fishing nets, crab nets everywhere, and you're hoisting down, and the boat's like rocking back and forth and side to side. And so I haven't had any of those yet, which is a good thing. But at the same time, you still want those sweet missions.
That's like the movie scenes, like something out of Perfect Storm.
Yeah. But I'm told like, if I stick around the East Coast long enough, like the Atlantic is a cruel, cruel mistress. And there's going to be stuff. And like we have all the instructors that teach us, when we're at the school in Comox on our course, they've done all these units and, they've seen so much stuff. So we get stories out of them, and all of them say like Gander, like being on the East Coast where I am is like, that's where like all the don't get me wrong, there's obviously action everywhere, but like a lot of the cases, like I said, because there's so few provincial assets here, we get a lot more missions. So that's pretty much why I wanted to get posted out here.
Was that your first choice?
Yeah, it was my first choice. Yeah.
Nice. So do people usually get their first choice?
Yeah, so I guess like I can only speak for my course, but by the sounds of it, like on our course, I think everyone got their first choice except for 2 guys because like they need SARTECs everywhere.
Right.
So they're not going to take they're not going to send 10 guys at one unit. They're just kind of going to spread it apart. And we were lucky enough that like guys, like sometimes guys don't want to go to Gander, Newfoundland. Because it's in the middle of nowhere. It's considered semi-isolated. Like you don't have a lot of, there's no big shopping here. You're like 2.5 hours from a Home Depot or whatnot. Like, don't get me wrong, there's still stuff here, but you're not going shopping at the mall.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it depends. Like at our course, we were lucky enough. Everyone kind of wanted to split, and we got our choices, and we got to talk amongst ourselves too, to know like, okay, they gave us this many positions or whatnot. And then ultimately the final call is done by, like the guys above us. And they're like, if you did really well on course, from my understanding is like, you would kind of get your first choice. And then the guys maybe that didn't do as well, like maybe then it would kind of get into a gray area, but I'm not sure. That's kind of like above me. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And so what would you say your favorite part of the job is?
Oh my God. I would say like the people, like the guys that I train with, work with are just so knowledgeable. They always want to be challenged. They're always challenging you. They're motivated. And just to work with those people is so much easier. Like every single day I want to wake up. I want to go to work because of the people I work with. And that's not just the SARTECs. That's like the pilots and the flight engineers and the support crews and even the mechanics. Like everyone out here lives for search and rescue. And it's just like such a healthy community and such a great community to be a part of. Everyone's got great mental, like positive attitudes and stuff. And I live for it. Everyone wants to help each other out. So I think that's probably like one of my favorite parts. And then like, there's obviously a lot of like really good stuff. Like we do a mandatory dive exercise in Florida every year.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. I mean, this year it didn't happen, but yeah. And then, we'll go skiing in the Rockies and we'll go diving on World War II shipwrecks. And we do a lot, we'll go jumping in Arizona. We'll go jumping, we'll go to Vegas to rock climb. And so, that part of it's pretty nice.
That's why I think SARTEC is one of the coolest jobs in the Canadian Forces.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm obviously biased. Yeah. And the gear too, like, and that was like in the Army, I hardly ever got something that fit me.
Yes.
Like my gloves were always too big. My boots were always too big. I never had a jacket that fit me. And that was it. You go to like the QM and you're like, hey, can I get a jacket? And they'd be like, we don't have your size. I'm like, well, can you order it? And they'd be like, Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, maybe eventually. And you never get what you want. But here it's like, they're like, no, you have a job to do. You're the expert in this job. We want you to be able to do your job. Here is the best kit you can have.
Yeah.
And they issue you the best. We get amazing, we get dry suits, we get fins, we get, harnesses, mountain gear, axes, everything, range, like everything we get is just like the best you can get. And it was like one of the first times I was ever comfortable doing my job. I didn't feel like I was just like super clumsy with these gloves that didn't fit me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're gonna
Yeah.
do it, so you might as well, like, you don't want to be hindered by something so stupid as like gloves that don't fit, right? Like something
Yeah.
that could be so easily fixed.
Oh yeah. And like, I remember going to the QM and I was like, because they usually only have men's sizes.
Mm-hmm.
And I try on like the men's small and I'm like, I guess it'll do.
Yeah.
And they're like, no. We're going to custom order you like a female version, even if we have to pay extra or whatnot. And I was just like, oh my God. And they're like,
Awesome.
yeah. So that's definitely like a really good part of it for sure.
Yeah, I can remember on my dive course, because you don't get the custom suits until after you finish, but I had
That's right. Yeah.
like my dry suit was the feet were so big, like the rest of it fit okay, but the feet were so big that my feet were almost coming out of the boots every time I kicked, and the wetsuit was huge. It would just get flooded with water every time. So getting out of the water, I just have like these big stovepipe legs full of water, but it's just so much more comfortable when you have gear that fits properly.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like, I'm sure like you're just like, no one understands what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah,
no one knows.
yeah.
Like I could be so much better than this if I had the right gear.
Yeah, okay. This interview's been awesome. This is so glad that we were able to pin this down.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad we finally got to it.
So I like to wrap it up with, what would your advice be to not necessarily younger, but just a female who is thinking of joining the military and maybe thinking of taking a little bit of a harder path by going into one of the trades such as SARTEC?
Yeah, so I mean, if someone would be listening and was like, oh, this sounds awesome. I want to parachute and administer medicine and help the Canadian community. I would say, if you're really into it, to become a search and rescue technician. So you can't apply straight as a civilian and become a SARTEC. So you have to do a minimum of 3 years as a combat trade or 4 years as any other trade. So if you come in as either an infantry, an artillery soldier, a combat engineer, I think that's it, the combat trades. Then you can do 3 years, then you can apply for search and rescue. And so I would say take that route, or a really good strong route, which gives you like a really, really strong background for the course, is if you become a medic.
Mm-hmm.
So if you join, you do your medics training, and then you become like a medic with the Army, essentially. You do that for like 4 years. You try to go to like an Army unit or whatnot, get as much experience as possible, then eventually apply for search and rescue. But yeah, definitely like work on getting out there and put yourself in situations where you are failing and you are learning, because that's what a lot of this job is. And getting here is like, if you're lucky enough, you're going to make it on the first go. But like everyone I've talked to have had their failures. And if you put yourself in situations where you're trying to learn something new and it's hard and you're making yourself uncomfortable and you're dealing with failure and you can overcome that, then you have the right attitude. You have the attitude that we want in this trade. And so start climbing, try to get into diving. You don't have to go like crazy. Like everyone spends a lot of money and tries to get this super strong background.
Right. Yeah.
To then like go on course and learn everything.
Yes.
So, just like spend a lot of time outdoors, try to just get into like different sports and just work on fitness. But like anyone can do it. Like if that's your goal, like I'm the last person that's going to tell you, you can't do it, obviously. And just be patient. Like it's going to take some time, but stay motivated, keep working hard.
And follow that Chris Hadfield advice to just do things that are going to put you in a better position to achieve that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Yeah. And like, just don't get discouraged, because sometimes it's going to be, the Army side of things that's going to take a long time for your paperwork to go through, or someone's going to lose your paperwork and then you're going to have to wait another year. Like, you know, we've had guys, they lost their paperwork, they have to wait another year to do selection, they have to train all over again. If you really want to be here, like you'll get here. But yeah, don't be discouraged by anyone. And like, people are sometimes afraid to break the mold, you know, but that's what we want as a SAR tech. We want that guy that's like, you know, when you're in a classroom or you're learning something and the instructor goes, does anyone have any questions? And like, no one asks the questions. Yeah. And then everyone turns around and is like, oh, I don't really know what we have to do. Yeah, we don't want that. We want one person. We want one person who's like, can we just, you know, can you be clear about this? I kind of really want to make sure I'm doing this right. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Sweet. Thanks so much for today again.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to help support this podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review on your Apple Podcast app.